All right, so imagine Thanksgiving, right?
Yeah.
But it's not this big national holiday. It's like celebrated on different days, mostly in the North. In the South's like, Thanksgiving. What's that?
Yeah, kind of a different picture than our Thanksgiving, huh?
Totally. It's crazy to think that was the reality back in the mid-1800s. Like, no set date, no national unity, no canned cranberry sauce.
Hard to imagine Thanksgiving without the cranberry sauce. But yeah, that's where we're going today. We're diving into the surprising origins of Thanksgiving and our guide, this awesome NPR podcast called The Mother of Thanksgiving. Get ready for some serious history.
Not your typical dry history lesson, though, right?
Not even close. What's so cool is they bring in all these different voices, historians, but also descendants of the Wampanoag tribe and even Sarah Joseph Hale's own words from her writings. It's like multiple perspectives all woven together.
Sarah Jessica Hale. Now, this woman was a force of nature. We're talking the editor of Goody's Ladies Book.
Hugely influential magazine back in the 19th century.
Think ultimate lifestyle guide for women. Fashion tips, recipes, and articles that really made you think.
And you gotta remember, this is a time when women's voices, they weren't exactly amplified in the public sphere, but Hale, she used her platform to champion causes she believed in, especially education for women.
Because she saw education as like empowerment.
Exactly. A way for women to have a voice in society and shape their own futures. And this is where it gets really interesting. Hale had this grand vision for Thanksgiving. She saw it as a way to unify a nation that was honestly becoming more and more divided over slavery.
So the idea was a shared national holiday, everyone celebrating on the same day. It could bring about a sense of unity, a shared American identity.
Right. Except not everyone was on board with that vision.
Especially in the South. Huh?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Down south, Thanksgiving was viewed with a lot of suspicion. Some even saw it as this, I don't know, Yankee holiday pushing a northern agenda, especially around, you guessed it, abolitionism.
So it wasn't just about pumpkin pie and family gatherings. There was this whole political undercurrent to Thanksgiving.
Oh, absolutely. And it gets even more intense. Some abolitionist ministers, they actually used Thanksgiving sermons to critique slavery.
Which you can imagine didn't sit well in the South.
Nope, not at all. You got to remember, tensions over slavery were incredibly high at this point. For Southerners, Thanksgiving felt like this subtle way of Northern values creeping into their way of life.
But Hale, despite all this resistance, she didn't back down. She went full force into these letter-writing campaigns, governors, congressmen, even presidents, urging them to make Thanksgiving a national holiday.
And it wasn't just a couple of polite letters. She was relentless. And what's amazing is how she crafted her arguments.
How so?
She really emphasized the social and moral benefits of this shared national celebration, appealing to patriotism and those good old-fashioned family values. Essentially, her argument was that Thanksgiving, it could be this unifying force in a nation that was, frankly, falling apart.
Smart strategy. But she still faced pushback.
Oh, tons. Plenty of politicians argued that Thanksgiving, it was a religious thing or a state matter, not something the federal government should be meddling in.
Which is funny. Cause those same arguments about federal versus state power, we still hear them today. It's like history repeating itself.
Right. It's crazy how relevant those debates still are.
Okay, so we've got this passionate advocate in Sarah Joseph Hale, a nation teetering on the edge of civil war, and a holiday that's already super politically charged. What happens next?
Well, this is where understanding the historical context is key. It's 1863. The Civil War is raging. And President Lincoln, he's desperate for anything that can help bring the country together.
And that's when Sarah Jessica Hale enters the picture.
You got it. She writes directly to Lincoln, lays out her case one final time. And here's the kicker. 5 days later, Lincoln issues a proclamation declaring Thanksgiving a national holiday.
Talk about timing.
I know, right?
It does make you wonder, though, was it all Hale's doing, or were there other forces at play?
That's a great question. And honestly, it was probably a combination of factors. I mean, Lincoln was a savvy politician. He knew the symbolic power of Thanksgiving, especially in a time of national crisis. But there's zero doubt in my mind that Hale's tireless advocacy played a huge role in making it happen.
So Thanksgiving becomes a national holiday.
Yeah.
Check. But then there's this whole first Thanksgiving story that gets woven into the narrative. You know, pilgrims, Native Americans, a big happy feast. And, well, that story isn't exactly accurate, is it?
You're right. The image of that first Thanksgiving as this super harmonious gathering, it's mostly a product of, well, later romanticization. It's a classic example of how history can get, I don't know, shaped and reshaped to fit certain narratives.
So all those Thanksgiving plays we did in elementary school, the construction paper turkeys, the pilgrim hats, it was all based on what, like a myth?
Well, not entirely a myth, but definitely a very, very idealized version of what actually went down. What's interesting is this whole first Thanksgiving myth, it really took hold in the late 1800s, decades after Sarah Josepha Hale started her campaign for a national holiday. The nation was still kind of healing from the Civil War, grappling with its identity, searching for symbols of, I don't know, unity and shared heritage.
So this idealized version of the first Thanksgiving, all about harmony and cooperation, it really served a purpose.
Totally. It provided this comforting narrative, this way to imagine a shared past that kind of transcended all those divisions in the present.
I get it, but how did this myth even take root? Like, was there a specific moment that sparked it all?
Well, the podcast, it points to this single footnote in a historical document from the 1840s. Basically, this footnote, attached to an account of that shared meal between the Wampanoag and the Pilgrims, just states this was the first Thanksgiving. And from there, boom, the myth explodes. Artists, writers, eventually even school curriculums, they all latch onto it.
Wow, a single footnote. It's crazy how these tiny details can totally change how we see history.
It is. It really shows how history isn't always about, like, objective facts. It's more about how those facts are interpreted, framed, woven into narratives.
It makes you wonder, how did the Wampanoag people feel about all this romanticized version of their history?
Such a good question. And the NPR podcast, it really delves into that. Because the reality for the Wampanoag after that first Thanksgiving, it was way more complex and often pretty tragic.
So instead of peaceful coexistence, shared prosperity, what did they actually face?
Well, the source material paints a completely different picture. Instead of harmony, there's displacement, loss of land, this constant struggle to maintain their cultural identity in the face of, relentless colonial expansion. Their story, it's one of incredible resilience in the face of some truly immense challenges.
It's a side of Thanksgiving we don't often hear about, right? We're all focused on the feast and the family time, but there's this whole other layer of history that's, I think, just as important to understand.
I agree. And it's not just about the past. The podcast highlights how these two different narratives, the idealized myth and the, I guess, harsher reality, they continue to shape how we debate Thanksgiving even today.
So what does Thanksgiving represent today, then? Is it about unity? Is it a reminder of historical injustices? Or is it just a day to enjoy some turkey and stuffing with family?
Oh, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And honestly, there's no easy answer. For some, Thanksgiving's a time to reflect on the nation's history, the good and the bad. For others, it's purely a family tradition, a day for gratitude and connection. And for many, it's probably a mix of both.
So it's almost like Thanksgiving has evolved into this multi-layered holiday with different meanings for everyone.
Exactly. And you see that in the podcast, all those diverse voices, historians emphasizing the need for a more accurate, more nuanced view of the past, Native American activists, community leaders sharing their own perspectives and experiences, and then just everyday people talking about their personal Thanksgiving traditions. It's fascinating.
It's like Thanksgiving has become this mirror, reflecting our own values and beliefs about history, family, even national identity.
That's a perfect way to put it. And it speaks to Sarah Josepha Hale's vision. She wanted Thanksgiving to be this unifying force. And in a way, it has become that. But maybe not in the way she first imagined. It's a space where we can wrestle with our past, celebrate our present, even debate our future.
Okay, so we've talked about Sarah Josepha Hale's campaign, the myths and realities of the first Thanksgiving, how those different narratives have shaped the holiday. But before we wrap up, let's go back to that NPR podcast for a second. It wasn't all about Thanksgiving, right? They also touched on other historical events, like King Philip's War.
You're right. That war, it happened in the late 1600s, decades after that first Thanksgiving. And it really shows how the relationship between colonists and Native Americans, well, it broke down. It's tragic, but it's an essential part of understanding Thanksgiving's history, all the complexities.
So what exactly happened? Was it just a clash of cultures?
It was much more than that. The podcast talks about how tensions built up as colonists took over more and more Native American land. They imposed their own laws and customs, essentially ignored treaties that had been made. They felt like they were entitled to the land, driven by, I guess, religious zeal and economic ambition.
Sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It was. And the war itself, brutal. devastating, lots of casualties on both sides. But ultimately, the colonists won. They solidified their dominance in the region and, further marginalized the indigenous population.
It's a stark reminder that the Thanksgiving story, the one we often hear, it leaves out some really crucial parts. We need to acknowledge the displacement, the violence, the lasting impact of colonization on Native American communities.
Absolutely. And it's not just about acknowledging the past, it's about recognizing how those injustices from history, they still affect us today.
So how do we reconcile those two narratives then? The idealized first Thanksgiving and the harsh realities Native Americans faced in the centuries after. How do we even celebrate a holiday with such a complicated history?
That is the big question. And it's something society is grappling with right now. There's this growing movement to recognize Native American perspectives and experiences as a core part of Thanksgiving.
So it's not just like adding a side note to the Thanksgiving story. It's about a whole new way of looking at it.
Right, yeah. It's about moving beyond that simple picture of pilgrims and Native Americans just having a meal together. It's about acknowledging that, yeah, that happened, but what were the long-term consequences of that meeting? It's about recognizing the strength and the culture of Native American communities, not just in the past, but today as well.
And it seems like things are starting to shift that way, at least in some places. People are realizing we need to tell a more inclusive and, accurate Thanksgiving story.
I think so, yeah. There's definitely a growing awareness of the need to decolonize Thanksgiving, to make sure Native American voices and experiences are at the center of the story. And we're seeing that in how Thanksgiving is taught in schools, even in how some families celebrate it.
So what does that look like? Like, how are people actually changing how they think about Thanksgiving?
Well, some people are trying to bring parts of Native American culture into their celebrations, like learning about and cooking traditional indigenous foods, or inviting Native American speakers to share their stories and perspectives at their Thanksgiving gatherings.
That sounds like a really powerful way to honor the history and the present, both.
It is. It's recognizing that Thanksgiving, as we celebrate it, wouldn't even exist without Native Americans. It's about seeing how our histories are woven together and understanding the importance of respecting and learning from different cultures.
And for some, it might be about supporting Native American causes and communities in a more material way, right?
For sure. There are lots of organizations out there fighting for the rights of Native Americans today. Things like land rights, protecting their cultural heritage, fighting for economic justice. Thanksgiving can be a time to learn about these issues and find ways to help.
Wow. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the mother of Thanksgiving, it feels like we've uncovered way more than just the history of a holiday, huh? We've talked about how national identity changes, the power of stories, and how important it is to face those parts of history that make us uncomfortable.
I think that's a great way to put it. Thanksgiving, with its complex and layered history, it's like a miniature version of the American experience itself. It reflects our successes and our failures, what we strive for, and the contradictions we still struggle with.
And it pushes us to think critically about the stories we tell ourselves about the past and how those stories shape how we understand the world today.
It reminds us that history isn't fixed. It's an ongoing conversation, a process of learning, unlearning, and relearning. And Thanksgiving gives us this really unique chance to participate in that process.
Absolutely. So, as we all gather with our loved ones this Thanksgiving, let's keep in mind the full story behind this holiday that seems so simple on the surface. Let's recognize Sarah Josepha Hale's vision of unity, but also acknowledge the complexities and injustices that her vision sometimes hid.
Yeah, let's honor the strength and rich culture of the Wampanoag people and remember that their story is part of our story, too.
And let's use this time for more than just feasting and football. Let's make it a time for reflection, learning, and having meaningful conversations about how we can create a more just and equitable world for everyone.
That's a great point to end on. As you all sit down to your Thanksgiving meal, think about what this holiday truly means to you. Is it about unity? Is it a reminder of past injustices? Or is it just a time to be with loved ones and be thankful? Whatever your answer, we hope this deep dive has given you the knowledge and background to have those conversations with more awareness and understanding.
And if this exploration of Thanksgiving has sparked your curiosity, make sure you subscribe to the deep dive for more fascinating topics and hidden histories just waiting to be uncovered. We'll keep bringing you insightful discussions, surprising facts, and questions that make you think differently about the world around you.
Until our next deep dive, keep those questions coming, keep learning, and keep exploring. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone!